It is my pleasure to introduce Kirsten Gillibrand, United States Senator for New York since 2009. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's top priorities in the United States Senate include creating more well-paying jobs to rebuild the middle class, increasing access to good, affordable health care, and improving educational opportunities from pre-K to college or vocational training. She has consistently been a voice for the voiceless across New York. Welcome, Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And hello to everybody in the Rochester Area Community Foundation for putting this event together. And thanks, Simeon, for moderating. I also want to thank RICF and everyone joining us today, including our local leaders like Pittsford Town Board member Stephanie Townsend, for everything you do to help our community and to fund so many programs that the Rochester community and Rochester families do rely on. There's no question that COVID has made the last year incredibly challenging for everybody. But the pandemic, like all crises, has hit communities of color and low-income communities the hardest, shining a spotlight and magnifying existing inequities in our society. As a legislator, I see it as my responsibility to not only address these issues, but to make sure that everyone is included in recovery so that we can have economic growth and economic opportunity for everyone. This includes healthcare, to access to capital, to opportunities in education, and fundamentally directing response to areas of institutional and systemic racism that causes and exacerbates them. My first priority in the American Rescue Plan was to get aid to families and communities who are struggling to make ends meet. Right now, families are receiving relief checks and expanded child care tax credits, programs that help them put food on the table and pay their bills are getting more resources. And our state and cities are getting more resources for government services that help support families across New York. But we know that this will not be the last crises we face as a nation. So as we rebuild, we have to build back better. We have to invest in bold, new ideas that right the wrongs of the past and build a country where every community is ready to meet the opportunities and challenges of the future. The last year has made it abundantly clear that we need to improve access to public services and public service jobs everywhere, but especially in our communities of color. The American Rescue Plan includes a nearly $8 billion down payment on a health force, which was my legislation to create a nationwide public health workforce to help us roll out vaccines and bring care and public health, those jobs back to underserved areas. And I want to make sure that public service jobs are available to everyone. I think we can do this by offering debt-free college to those willing to serve in their local communities, like the way the GI Bill has done for decades for those who serve in the military. I'm also focused on making sure that our plans to rebuild and repair infrastructure create more equity in our communities and address the harm that the Robert Moses era highways caused by cutting off communities from each other, cutting through the heart of communities of color, breaking up neighborhoods, cutting off downtown and those communities from the rest of the region. These were much of the legacies left by those projects at the turn of the century into the 30s and 40s. So my bill, the Build Local, Hire Local, will address that directly. It creates family supporting jobs where they are most needed. It trains new workers who can build and maintain our infrastructure for years to come in the regions where they live, and spurs economic recovery in communities of color hit the hardest by the past infrastructure decisions and the pandemic. I also want to ensure that American Family Plan builds the economic infrastructure that we need and have needed for so long. We've seen millions of women, including many women of color, leave the workforce in droves over the last year because they didn't have access to paid time off or the supports they need for their children who were distance learning or family members who were sick. If we improve access to affordable childcare and caregiving and create a national paid leave program and universal pre-K, we can provide every family with a security and the stability they need to thrive. We have to create a truly inclusive recovery. We need to be able to look at these kind of bold, big picture approaches that lifts up every community and leaves us all better prepared to weather the next crisis when our family and our nation will be tested. I know that all of you will continue to fight the good fight in Rochester, and you can count on me to partner with you in Washington. And now I'm happy to turn it over to our moderator, and I will answer all questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Gillibrand, for being with us today, and we certainly appreciate your collaboration and your partnership. We have a few questions, some that have come in and some that we were able to gather from a consortium of members of the community, as well as folks from the various collective impact vehicles that we have here in Rochester. So the first of those is, are there any elements, and you being a fellow upstater, I can appreciate this. So any elements of the American Rescue Plan that you think are especially beneficial for Rochester and the Finger Lakes region?
Yes. One of the things that Senator Schumer and I fought hardest for was the money to go directly to states and localities. We wrote legislation called the Direct Support for Communities Act that basically assured that every municipality would receive direct funding. Currently, Rochester is estimated to receive over $200 million in direct funding. The Finger Lakes region will see upwards of $560 million in local funding. So this funding means that municipalities can meet their payroll for our first responders, close budget gaps that have grown under COVID, avoid layoffs for frontline workers, and meet the needs of other social service and community support programs that really work, but are often the last to be funded.
And Senator Gillibrand, in your opening comments, you talked a little bit about how the ARPA benefits families, nonprofits, arts organizations, and small businesses. I want to give you a chance to just drill down any further on any of those.
Yes. So the bill, the American Rescue Plan, it's designed to tackle once in a generation crises and problems that, as we've seen, have manifested because of legacy inequities. So one of the things we did was a one-year expansion of the child care tax credit, the child tax credit, expanding full eligibility to 23 million children who didn't previously benefit. That is a huge lift for children and families. It also included funding for childcare, as well as more funding for SNAP programs and the pandemic EBT benefits, so that children can get access to breakfast, lunch, dinner programs that schools used to offer. So even when schools are closed, that funding still continues to go into the community, so more feeding programs can access more families. From the business side, we worked on the Paycheck Protection program, the PPP program, and we expanded the eligibility to not-for-profits. Specific to the arts, the plan included another $1.25 billion for the Shuttered Venue Operators Grants Program to help theaters, museums, and concert halls bounce back after being closed for a year. And finally, we also invested in the Restaurant Revitalization Grant Program, which I supported and Senator Schumer supported, that specifically designed to help restaurants, which are often the lifeblood of main streets, and get them back on their feet. That program would make $26.8 billion available in the form of grants to bars, restaurants, food trucks, anyone in the food industry to be able to open their doors and keep them open.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. And I must say that having co-led the Communities Crisis Fund, we were certainly grateful for the support from the Paycheck Protection program for nonprofit organizations. That ended up being huge and allowed us to use a lot of our resources to help in other ways. Now, there are some people that are saying that the ARPA, I may be one of them, and potentially the American Families Plan and Jobs Plan really do match the scope and scale of the New Deal. And one of the things that we know about the New Deal is that it systemically excluded certain populations. And examples that came to mind And this was mentioned earlier, the exclusion of farmers and domestic workers, which were largely Black and Latinx workers from Social Security, and of course, housing discrimination through the creation of the Homeowners Loan Corporation and its red line maps. How does the ARPA attempt to redress the legacy of structural racism?
So first of all, we know that our frontline and essential workers were disproportionately women and women of color. And so we needed to make sure that this program directly benefited them, because not only are they being disproportionately harmed, but they're disproportionately holding the weight of all of society on their shoulders. So that's why we went to specifically there to make sure that these programs helped them. The ARPA provided funding to support communities of color, including $45 billion in rental and homeowner assistance, $1,400 direct payments, $300 in supplemental unemployment assistance, and increases in the earned income tax credit that will help about 17 million low-income workers and more. We also have to do more work in the long run to support communities of color, and I have a bunch of different bills to do that we're trying to get some of them in the next COVID relief package. So for example, postal banking, we still have a third of this country that is unbanked or underbanked, and largely in low-income communities and communities of color. So we want to turn our post offices into basic banking establishments, which they used to be from the turn of the century straight to 1966. But again, for these communities that are left behind from the banking industry, it allows them to have checking, savings, microloans at the end of the month, low interest loans, mortgages. And as you know, post offices are already in every community. So it would have enormous equitable impact. We want to make sure that we secure voting rights. We've seen voting rights attacked all across this country in lots of red states. So we want to pass the For the People Act, which includes most of the legislation that I worked on with the late John Lewis, the Voter Empowerment Act, to ensure that people get equal access to the ballot, to make sure that communities of color are not continually disenfranchised. We want to look at the inequities in healthcare. There's been enormous disparities in access to healthcare for Black and Brown communities. And one example of those inequities is the maternal mortality rate for Black women, who are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from complications before, during, and after birth. So we have a group of bills that we've affectionately named the Momnibus. And it has a bill from me, a bill from Kamala that she worked on before she became Veep, and a bill from Cory Booker. And so it's a great group of legislation to change how doctors and nurses are trained, but also give them better tools and more funding to combat racial bias in healthcare. There's inequities in education. So we want to make sure that we tackle student debt crisis that is disproportionately harmful to Black and Brown students, who typically graduate with $25,000 more in student loan debt than do white college graduates. And they hold a disproportionate share of the $1.7 trillion in student debt. So I have a couple of ideas to fix that. First, we want to revise the public service loan forgiveness program, which was already a law in place under the Obama administration, but nobody got the loan forgiveness. In the last 10 years, I don't even know, like a couple percentage got it. 1 or 2% of the eligible people have gotten it. So the Department of Education somehow made it so difficult to apply for the loan forgiveness that it didn't work. So we're trying to fix that. I'm working with Tim Kaine on that. But then I have a bigger idea that says, if you're willing to go into a whole host of public service careers, from healthcare, education, green jobs, first responders, military, or intelligence services, that you can, if you agree to do 2 years, you get 2 years of community college paid for. If you agree to do 4 years, you get 4 years of college paid for. And you could use the same grants or payments for higher ed as well as advanced degrees. So you can use it for any type of education if you go into these public service careers. So that's a bigger version of what we're trying to fix, which is the public service loan forgiveness program. That's the big idea. And that gets anyone who's willing to do public service debt-free college, which I think is important. And then last, we have to address inequities and institutional racism in policing. The fact that Black Lives Matter movement has taken the country by storm and that this is a moment of reckoning, it does not get lost on any of us in public service that we have to fix how our country defines public safety. We need to make sure we root out institutional racism and discrimination in policing, in law enforcement, in the military, and in how we actually define public safety. So we want to change how we look at public safety to make sure we have more mental health specialists, more public and community workers as part of response teams for public safety, so that what's happened in New York, where someone who's mentally ill is having an episode and their family member calls and says, please save our son, our brother, and that the only response is deadly force, that has to change. And so we just need to find public safety very differently and change how we invest our money to reflect those priorities. So those are just a thumbnail sketch of 5 big ideas that I think could help how we address institutional racism. And hopefully we can get some of that included in the next COVID bill. And if not, the next big reform bill, because some of these are policy changes, not just money spent. And when you do a reconciliation bill, it has to just be budgetary. It can't be policy. So some of this stuff we have to pass on its own, up or down votes. And I hope we get a vote on all of them, because we were elected a majority in the Senate for a reason, and we're elected the presidency for a reason. And so we need to deliver on these core structural changes that speak to who we are as a nation.
Senator Gillibrand, just following up on that particular point, do you think that there's a chance that these pieces of legislation, particularly the follow-ups, that they get passed? Is there a real chance for that to happen?
So each one's different. So there's huge momentum right now behind the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that includes my Eric Gardner Excessive Force Prevention Act, which bans the chokeholds and other carotid or artery holds. They would be banned. There's huge momentum because we have a bipartisan coalition that is being led by Cory Booker and Tim Scott. 2 Black men who serve in the U.S. Senate who are profoundly thoughtful and effective in advocacy on these topics. I think it's going to be very difficult for anyone to vote against a bipartisan coalition that they create. I think it'll be hard for Republicans to vote against it. And, you know, I can't imagine a Democrat voting against it. So that I think has real possibility and momentum. So I'm very optimistic on that. The Voter Empowerment Act legislation, I don't think Republicans are going to vote for that because they seem to really thrive on disenfranchising voters in a very negative way. And so I don't think they're going to support this bill, even though they should. So I think that bill will only get done if we do filibuster reform. And I would even say if we can get Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema to agree, we'll just do filibuster reform for this one bill, it would be worth it to get that done. Although I fully support getting rid of filibuster reform, period, so that we could do all these things. Addressing maternal mortality, that can get tucked into any healthcare reform bill, and that will be bipartisan and widely supported because it's so common sense and the facts do not lie. And I think there's enough empathy that everyone should care about mothers dying. So I'm hopeful that that can be bipartisan. And then the debt-free college is a big idea. So I don't know. If I can find a Republican, then I can build on that. I don't have a Republican yet for the idea, but I'm not, it just may take longer. It's a big idea. It's like the cornerstone of a presidency. That idea would be the kind of thing that, you know, I was running for president on. I thought it was that big of an idea. National public service as the cornerstone of economic revival, I think is such a big idea. It might take a few more years to make it widely popular so people fight for it. But I'm committed to that because I think it levels the playing field for communities of color and women in a way that I think nothing else does.
It's really an important point, particularly around leveling that playing field and making sure that there are accessible opportunities for folks to be engaged. One of the questions, and we've been talking with folks all across Rochester about this idea of inclusive recovery. One question that keeps coming up in community conversations is how can we ensure that more economically vulnerable people end up with ARPA dollars in their pockets? And folks are making a distinction between programs for the economically vulnerable and actual dollars ending up in their pockets. Do you have any thoughts?
So yes, one of the ways that the American Rescue Plan was set up to deal with this is ensuring that our small businesses who need it the most are the ones benefiting. So that means putting more money into organizations like the community development financial institutions and the minority depository institutions. These are financial institutions that are set up specifically to serve as a gateway to capital access and lending in traditionally underserved communities. Thereby it cuts down on the red tape that often keeps these resources from getting to communities of color and getting to businesses that are often ignored. So, and it took us 3 tries to do this. So it's not like we got this right from the beginning, because the first PPP plan did not go to these businesses. The second PPP plan did not go to these businesses. So this is the 3rd iteration of it, where we said, you have to spend money into these organizations that are designed to work directly with these minority-owned businesses to say, this loan is for you, and we are going to make sure you apply for it and get it. And not be left behind because of some red tape or paperwork that didn't get done properly. So it's very important that we invest in these types of organizations. The American Rescue Plan increased the amount of funding flowing through these institutions by 40%. So when it comes to individuals seeing the benefit, you can't get direct so that's the strategy for the businesses, and then the strategy for the individuals is just getting checks directly into people's hands. And that's why the UI money was so important. It's why direct checks to Americans was really important, because they have money in their pockets, they can spend it how they want, and that's the quickest and most efficient way to get money to everyone who actually needs it.
Thank you. And just as a quick follow-up, you kind of touched on this a little bit with the Paycheck Protection program, some of the challenges in terms of the disparities and, frankly, the dearth of banking relationships and Black and Brown communities, the impact that had. I think, again, we're really trying to wrestle with this idea of ensuring that disadvantaged populations are able to fully benefit from the provisions of the ARPA. Is there any value? This was a direct question that came in from one of our partners. Is there any value in something like a public website or some other way of clarifying the funds, their availability, making sure that people are taking advantage, for example, of the tax credits? So we know some work is happening in Rochester around that. Would something like a public website or some other resource be valuable to a community like ours?
Absolutely. And if those 2 entities don't have one, they need one. If the CDFIs and the minority deposit institutions don't have a public website that does a TikTok through these programs, then they should. And if the Biden administration hasn't set something up specifically, they should. We've learned through the first couple iterations of the American Rescue Plan what mistakes we've been making. So we should be able to fix that by direct access. So I think you're absolutely right. We have made changes along the way to the PPP program, including increasing loan amounts for sole proprietorships and for individual contractors, and eliminating restrictions around student loan debt and non-fraud felony convictions. Those were 2 things that were impediments that we tried to remove. Congress also voted to extend the PPP program until May 2021, end of May, which again, we probably need to extend it again. The program will only accept new applications from community financial institutions, which typically serve minority borrowers, as about $8 billion in funding was set aside for those businesses. So we are trying to do more, but I think I agree with you, with more public outreach, especially for these last set of loans. Publicly available information should be on websites, but also should be in other places that people can get access to them. So, because they might not even know where to look them up in a website. So yeah, there needs to be more outreach. I agree. And maybe just direct outreach to businesses where they just call businesses. And maybe that's something that local leaders can do through the money that we sent to localities, having their Chamber of Commerce or their community development, economic development organizations do direct phone calls to individual businesses that, have you gotten a PPP loan yet? Do you want one? What access to capital do you need? I think that might be able to get the last few remaining businesses to actually apply for money. So I think it might need to be even more direct than just a website.
Yeah, yeah.
People
No,
sometimes don't know how to find or access.
that's true. And then what we're seeing with some of the issues around digital equity, you're absolutely right that
Yeah.
some of the folks that need it the most have the most challenge.
Yeah, and it's true for Black and Brown communities. It's also true for rural communities,
Absolutely.
where they might even have high-speed internet because broadband doesn't want to go everywhere because it's not economic to go everywhere. So
Mhm.
I think direct outreach by localities is probably the last mile help we need, actually, calling business leaders and maybe having community meetings. Maybe that's something I could do, and have, when I do my next upstate tour, have a roundtable specifically to businesses to come to so that they can, meet with my staff so they know who to call, what to do to get those last few loans before they're finished.
Yeah, well, that if we can support that, we certainly will. And kind of keeping on this theme of public engagement and public outreach, we know that the way that the ARPA was constructed is that it uses a lot of the pre-established channels like
Yep.
community development block grants. And so a lot of the dollars end up going to the municipalities. Can you just broadly comment on the need for public transparency, any advice for municipalities, and engaging the broader community in its decision-making?
So, yes, I agree with that because because of the nature of a pandemic and the urgency of economic relief, we used existing organizations and ways of doing things to get money and information out, but it didn't work. So this is part of the challenges that we have of the legacy of institutional racism in government, in access to information. And this is a whole nother layer of systemic and structural challenges that we need to overcome. And so what I do hope, which we can work with you on, Simeon, is what channels aren't working? What channels are white-only channels? Like which not-for-profits and business service organizations don't reach all businesses? I think that's the kind of information we would benefit from learning and researching and acknowledging, and then so that I, as your senator, can start building infrastructure around the need that hasn't been built yet. A lot of the care economy that I've been working on is doing that. That's what I'm trying to do because it doesn't exist. And that's one of the problems with institutional gender bias. The fact that most of our legislators are men, are not necessarily primary caregivers, are white and wealthy. Like that really affects what problems are solved. So I've been trying to increase the diversity in Congress, increase the number of women in Congress so that more problems are identified and more solutions are identified and better solutions. And so, yes, I would like support on that for sure. Because I think that I don't think that the avenues of relief are complete. I think they are largely incomplete. And as we've seen, and this is proof of it, during COVID, 500 people became billionaires. So obviously some lines of economic recovery work exceedingly well for some people. And some industries are perfectly protected despite epidemics and other horrible national tragedies. So that's where it works perfectly. But that divide, not only the wealth gap, but the digital divide and all these other divides have just widened. And it's why women have disproportionately left the workplace, 5.4 million. It's why communities of color have disproportionately suffered because the haves, the have-nots widens. And so I agree with you that the infrastructure and the lines of communication and resources are not equitable. And so I hope we can figure out through community engagement how to fix what's broken for the long haul. And I'm definitely open to that. So when you get feedback from this town hall, please share it with me so I can start working on that kind of legislation.
Most assuredly will. And in fact, actually, I know that a number of the advocates, and frankly, a lot of families, are really hoping for the permanence of some of the provisions in the RPA, particularly around the child care credit and the child credit. What do you think the prospects are? Do you hope for the same? Is there any reason for us to be optimistic?
Yes. the reason to be optimistic is I'm on this. This is the thing I'm trying to fix. And I'm not letting my colleagues forget about it. And you've seen there was like a huge Twitter debate on what's the definition of infrastructure. Well, we are trying to redefine infrastructure to include both the hard and soft infrastructure, both the transportation infrastructure and the human infrastructure, because both of it matters a lot. And so extending the child independent care tax credit is really important and should be a permanent change. Funding affordable daycare has to become a permanent change. Funding childcare slots and universal pre-K has to be permanent, and having a national paid leave plan and making that permanent. And this is literally the battle I'm fighting right now to make sure it's part of the next COVID bill with colleagues. Like, I'm fighting Democrats on this. So it's something that, again, please be heard on, write editorials and speak to your local electeds and make sure we let everyone high and low know how important this is. Because if this moment passes and we don't fix some of these structural inequities, it's just going to be so challenging. It'll be another decade, and we cannot wait another decade.
We certainly can't. It does feel like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to really make meaningful headway.
Yeah, and to fix long-standing problems, which really hurt us during a pandemic.
Absolutely. It's funny, we were in some conversation and we were talking a little bit about back in 08 and 09, the last stimulus, and just thought, geez, with those shovel-ready projects, what would it have meant if we could have invested in our digital and broadband infrastructure?
Totally. We have to, you always have to learn from mistakes. You have to live and learn. I said that to myself this morning. And it is essential. Like, we missed an opportunity then because we were so afraid of time passing us that it could only be shovel ready. Well, then we missed the chance to spend billions of dollars on healthcare reform, on education reform, on the digital divide, on the structural problems that we should have invested in. We should have invested in childcare then. We should have we should have invested in paid leave then. It was a lack of vision during a crisis that we can now hopefully fix. It was also a lack of power, because we had Mitch McConnell, who was determined after year 2 of President Obama's administration to unwind and undermine everything that he tried to do. But we had a moment and we didn't use it well. So we need to use this moment exceedingly well to not miss that chance to fix some longstanding inequities when we have an opportunity.
Now, Senator, we know that appropriations are really kind of the, if not the first step, an early part of the process, but that then this goes to the agencies to do rulemaking and prepare guidance, and that can play a critical role in shaping how the funds ultimately land in our communities. Any thoughts on how we might engage the agencies to ensure that there's an equitable process and that we don't maybe unintentionally put some things into the rulemaking and guidance that actually inhibits an equitable distribution?
So I think the Biden administration has taken the task of providing equitable and responsible leadership very seriously. The different agencies are currently working to establish their guidelines to best get resources to all of the American people. And our office stands ready to work with you and partner with the administration to further that process. So I would not hesitate to reach out to our office if in any communications with any agency there seems to be impediments or challenges. We can work to allay that. But it's just certainly something that President Biden has really said that he is putting front and center. He really believes in this administration being the most equitable ever in the history of the country. So he wants to prove it and show it. And so if we do run into challenges that we've certainly experienced in other administrations, just push back and let me know to be an ally in those fights.
Absolutely. A couple of questions that have come in through the Q&A here. Someone really loved the public service loan idea and wondered if childcare and out of school time and nonprofit staff would be included in individuals for the bill.
Yes, definitely. Because those are public service careers. And we would also, on both sides actually, if that depends how the question was asked, but yes, so anything in education would be public service. So if you want to be a child care provider, but the second question of can you spend the money on childcare so you can do the jobs, the answer is yes. So the way that we've written the bill is you can use your grant money to pay for tuition, pay for an advanced degree, to pay for the investment you need to start a small business or whatever it is. So you can use the resources. Like if you already paid off your student loan, but now want to commit to public service, you can use that grant money for anything that helps you on your journey to public service. So it's extremely flexible funding is the way we've written the legislation.
Senator Gillibrand, someone asks about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's position that payments to individuals is a disincentive to people to seek employment. How would that kind of positioning affect current policy and future legislation designed to get money directly to people?
So I do not, I don't know what statement they're referring to with the Chamber of Commerce, but I'll just assume you're talking about the debate we're having right now that is unemployment payments being paid to people, prohibiting them from going back to work. And the answer is it's far more complex than that, a straight up no, but the challenges include access to childcare, because some of our public schools still aren't opened in this country. Most daycare centers are not opened or don't have capacity. In New York, there was one slot for every 4 kids that needed daycare before the pandemic. Today, there's one slot for every 8 kids that need childcare. So that's an issue. Risks of COVID, fear of COVID, unsafe workplaces, still an issue. So it's a complex answer, and it's not as simple as, oh, well, you're giving people unemployment insurance checks. Of course, they're not going to work. I would not say that that is the answer. I think it is a complex answer that includes all the things I just said. And sometimes it might be pay, that they're not being paid enough in those careers. So for the risks they're taking. So that might be the question that your person's asking. But beyond that, I don't know what other positions the Chamber of Commerce has taken.
Someone else asks, notes that they love the idea of making banking and programs that level the playing field, love the idea of using the post office, and also wonder if libraries could be considered for this mission.
Well, libraries don't have the authority to offer banking. The thing that the post office, in its charter, when it was created by the U.S. government, it has banking. Today, it does money orders. It does $20 billion of money orders a year already. So you couldn't do it in libraries because they don't have the authority and have no experience in it. They already have the experience of financial services in post offices, and they were able to be a bank from the turn of the century till 1966. So they helped us recover from the Great Depression. They helped us recover from World War I and World War II. And it helps low-income families have access to capital and their own capital without being taken advantage of by predatory lenders or predatory schemes that make them pay so much more money for buying something or for access to their own funds. So no, it wouldn't be for libraries. It would really only be for post offices because they already have it in their authority.
Senator, so someone asks about the our Inner Loop North project, and you touched on this a little bit in the open about working through the kind of Bob Moses, approach to community development or devolvement, arguably. They ask if there's a way, given our Inner Loop North project, to mandate land trust money, which could be used to help people buy properties in neighborhoods and on the new land that's being created. Is that an opportunity to consider?
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. That's an interesting idea, but my staff and I will look at that.
Terrific, thank you. And then another question comes in about how we can convince some of these potentially doubting senators to realize that broadband access to underserved communities is a digital road the same way that roads made of concrete and concrete are.
I think they know it. I think their constituents have told them now. So I think that that's now been very easily put in the hard infrastructure category. So I think we'll get money for rural broadband and universal access to high-speed internet. But it also, on the education budget, we have to close the digital divide. So we have to make sure all families have access to computers and tablets and in-home internet access. And that's not true for all communities. And so that, I think, if we don't have universal support for that, I think it's the kind of issue that could have universal support if we keep making the case for it.
And Senator, one of the last questions that's come in is about kind of bipartisanship in Congress. This person wonders if the media is kind of hyping it up, is it as vitriolic as it seems, and how important is bipartisanship to equity in our nation's recovery?
Well, it's essential for governing. You have to constantly be working across the aisle to try to find bipartisan support. And so almost everything I do is bipartisan. But if Mitch McConnell, as he just said again, my job is to defeat this administration or something like that, if he refuses to do things on a bipartisan basis as the spokesperson for his party, then we will do things through reconciliation and we will reform the filibuster. I think trying to do it bipartisan is very important. And these ideas are certainly bipartisan by the view of the country. 88% support this next recovery bill and want us to invest in the country. And that's important. So I think that we can be bipartisan, but again, some people put politics above all else. And unfortunately, if Senator McConnell continues to do that, it limits our options. And so we might do things just with Democrats.
Senator, I want to give you a last word and then we'll wrap up.
Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to you, Simeon, for your great hosting, and to everyone on the call. And thank you for all our advocates.
We really appreciate everybody that's joined today. Thank you so much, Senator Gillibrand, for sharing insights about the American Rescue Plan Act, as well as inclusive recovery. We also want to encourage folks to come out tomorrow at 9 a.m. With ACT Rochester for our inclusive recovery event, where we'll continue the discussion with leaders from the city, the county, the school district, as well as scholars from the Urban Institute and the Brookings Institute to learn more about inclusive recovery. You can find that at actrochester.org, actrochester.org, and you'll find the link for the event for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We're continuing the discussion about inclusive recovery. We appreciate everybody for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you in the morning. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.